good friends, the ones we hold dear, the ones who will tell us what we need to hear, the ones who love us, right or wrong. And to all those good friends that give you this song.
Well, hello, good friends, and welcome back to The Last Walk, Remember When, with your host, Ron Baumbach. And we're going back in time again to 1964-65. So, get up off your easy chair, walk over to your fridge, reach out that tall glass of homogenized and pasteurized milk. Also get your Ovaltine, pour it into your glass and pour in that milk, stir it so it's good and smooth. Reach over to where your mom just made that cake. She has all those utensils with the mixing stuff and all that frostings on it, and you can lick the frosting off the knife and off the mixer. Sit back in your easy chair, close your eyes, but turn on that lava lamp. Get ready, it's storytelling time. The Last Walk is back.
Life is too short, we get only one turn. With luck we find beauty, but we sometimes get burned. But if you've had a true friend, or perhaps love, you've experienced the peace of heaven above.
I had been sharing with you some of the stories of the saga of my back from 1964 and 65, and a thing called scoliosis, which I received unluckily, but took care of it, and it's done now. Anyway, it was a story about what we went through, my family and I, in getting this thing fixed. Now, when we last left it, I was in the hospital with my friends Frankie, Stevie, and Gary. I just got my cast put on, was laying in bed, and basically waiting for surgery, which would be 3 or 4 weeks down the road. And I had a good time. I was with these guys, they're playing music, having a great time. I couldn't get out of bed, but basically they kept me in stitches. Now one day, my friend Frankie, who just had an operation and got his leg amputated and couldn't walk, but he could ride a real wheelchair really well. Frankie was pretty adept at these things. Somehow, Frankie convinced the good nurses that he and I needed to go for a walk together. A walk, and meet the other people on the floor. They looked at him like he had 3 heads. He convinced them. He said, "No, you give me a stretcher, put Ron on a stretcher, put me in a wheelchair, and I'll push him around and we'll get things done." Well, they agreed. I was in a stretcher, laying in my cast, Frankie in a wheelchair. He proceeded to push me room to room to meet our neighbors on the floor. We had an absolute blast. Now, it was during this walk that I met 2 of the most interesting people I'd met up to then in my life. There was a young girl, I forget her name now, but she was from Seaford, New York, who had the exact same problem I had, scoliosis. And her main concern was that she loved to ride horses. And they assured us both that after our operations would be over with, our backs would be so strong, stronger than ever. But we were told not to ride horses ever again for fear of falling and possibly doing damage. This news devastated her. She was so upset. We spent countless time on the phone, hours on the phone, talking about this and trying to console her about she'll get over it, she can ride a horse again, etc., etc. We had a shared journey. Ironically, once we both had our operations, and once we both were sent home, we lost touch. And I never did meet the girl again. But ironically, the girl of my dreams, my wife, came from the exact same town. It's funny how things work out. Now, the other person who caused me to look on in awe and wonder was a young fellow my age who was the victim of an accident as well. A handsome, young, blonde, 15-year-old boy who looked incredibly fit and trim. This kid looked like he could be an athlete. His attitude was incredibly positive, but his problem totally blew me away. Because of his accident, he was paralyzed from his neck down for life. He could only move his arms and his head, and that was it, nothing else. We would talk about sports and school and life in general. The kid never complained. He was always incredibly positive, one of the most positive people I've ever met in my life then or since then. I always admired his courage. He truly made me feel most thankful that in my mind I was in for minor surgery. This kid was incredible. A real hero to all the rest on the floor.
Life is too short, we get only one turn. With luck we find beauty, but we sometimes get burned. But if you've had a true friend, or perhaps in love, you've experienced a piece of heaven above.
Now, I became a fan favorite back home. I would get visitors from the family as often as possible. I was 55 miles away. So my parents would come on Dad's day off, and on weekends, on Saturday, he would come out, and on his one day off during the week. And on Sundays, my mom and my Aunt Estelle would take the train out, the Long Island Railroad, Dashing Dans, out to the Port Jefferson station. And I guess they'd walk up the hill or take a cab. I have no idea how they got there, but suddenly they would appear in my room. But the one person I didn't see for a long time was my sister Deb, who I wanted to see but couldn't see because she was too young. I think she was 9 years old. And back then, in those days, you couldn't have kids in the hospital visiting patients. So she had to wait down in the lobby while Mom and Dad would visit. And I basically spoke to her on the phone, didn't see her for months at a time. But the one thing I did see, and I got watch it on TV, listen on the radio, was my love of... Now, one Sunday, my cousins Barbara, Marjorie, and Eleanor came to visit me with their mom and dad and my mom. They knew I loved the Mets. That's my team. Always was and always will be. They signed my cast, but added something a bit extra, which caused quite a stir a few weeks later. Barbara took out a heavy black marker. I guess a magic marker you call it nowadays. And in big, bold letters she wrote, "Let's go Mets," on my plaster armor. It was really cool. I was a Met fan, and now I had it emblazoned right on my cast. People signed the cast, whatever it might be, but I had my "Let's Go Mets" right there on my cast.
Let's go Mets! Let's go Mets! Let's go Mets!
It was mid-afternoon on a cold December day. There wasn't much going on in the hospital. As I lay in my cast-embraced hospital bed, when suddenly I heard a ruckus coming down the hallway in the hospital floor. There was some sort of commotion going on, and a lot of people were talking and making a lot of noise. We had no idea, my roommates and I, what was going on, when suddenly my brother Dick comes into the room, surrounded by other members of the media with flashing light bulbs on their cameras. We're saying, "What's going on here?" Stepping through the crowd came one tall, strapping figure. He approached me and he said, "Hey, Ron, heard you were a really great Met fan, and the Mets and I wanted to wish you good luck on your operation that's coming up." I looked at him and I said, "Wow, you're Larry Bernard from the Mets. What are you doing here?" He went on to tell me that my brother Dick asked him to come and cheer me up. Then he saw my body cast with a big hole in the stomach with the words "Let's go Mets" emblazoned on my plaster belly. He gladly signed right next to it and said, "Gee, you really are a big Met fan, aren't you?" So he spoke for a while about the previous season. His appearance in a famous record-breaking 23-inning game against the Giants on May 31st of 1964. Larry and I recall all the amazing plays in that great game. I recall Willie Mays even played shortstop for one inning. And Roy McMillan, who was probably my favorite defensive shortstop of all time, got Willie Mays out on a triple play.
The score was tied 6-6, and that's the way it was at the end of 9. Now it was Ron Herbel pitching for the Giants and Larry Bernard for the Mets. Both teams had already used 7 other pitchers. No runs were scored in the 10th inning or in the 11th inning, and it was Roy McMillan who was keeping the Giants away from the plate.
Dissipator, runners go, and it's lined to McMillan on a double play, and maybe a triple play! A triple play! A throw on to first base! A triple play from McMillan to Crane. Pulling the side is retired. With the runners going, it was a line shot to McMillan. He stepped on the bag to double Jesus Salou and threw to first to triple Willie Mays. A triple play. Oh boy.
And so it went, with one incredible play after another on both sides. At the same time, Larry Bernard was turning in 8 innings of shutout ball until Galen Cisco came on in the 15th.
So here I am, laying in this hospital bed next to my hero, the guy who I watched play in that game a kid from St. John's University who made the Mets pitch 8 innings in that May 31st, 1964, 23-inning game, which unfortunately we lost by a double, I believe, to Jimmy Davenport, who always beat the Mets. But I was in awe. I had Larry Benoit right next to me, chatting with me about that game and everything else. How he got injured for part of the year, and our mutual hope for the coming season, 1965. All the while, the cameras were flashing, and I felt like I was back in the newly opened Shea Stadium, which was only open 1 year. And I was watching my beloved baseball Warriors at play. I was pumped. It was phenomenal. A moment in time which I would never forget what my brother Dick did for me. How he pulled it off was way beyond me, but obviously not beyond Dick. My picture appeared in the papers. I became sort of a local poster child. My Aunt Estelle carried a picture with her in her wallet all the time, until she finally gave it to me. Took it out of her wallet and said, "I want to give you this picture. I met someone you may like." She ran into Jackie Robinson at a charity event, went up to him, showed him the picture, told him about me, and he signed it. But the autograph I cherish the most, the one from all time, is the one from Larry Benoit on my cast. And I still have that cast, driving my wife crazy. It's 50 years old now, and that's part of my legacy, I guess, so to speak. Now, Larry became my personal crusader. I followed his career throughout baseball and always cheered him on, no matter what team he played for or what team he coached. He coached the Expos and the Rockies, and he was really, in many ways, my personal star. Now, the following spring, 1965, while I'm laying in the hospital bed, the Mets started spring training. My Aunt Violet, my dad's baby sister, heard of my visit from Larry Benoit. So she went to the training complex in St. Petersburg with an unsigned get well card. She tried to find Larry Benoit, wanted to give him the card, asked him to sign it, mail it back to me. But Larry did one thing better than that. Rather than sign the card himself, he took the card from her, went into the clubhouse, saw Casey Stengel, Yogi Berra, Warren Spahn, all the Mets players, Bud Harrelson, Ron Swoboda, all these people, had the whole team sign the card. Now, when that card came in the mail to me, and I had no idea it was coming in, it was overwhelming. Talk about brightening a kid's day, it certainly made mine. I was awestruck, and I still have that card. Now, my claim to fame spread throughout the village of Wilson Park, a lovely town. On the rare occasions I was allowed to come home from the hospital, in between operations, in a stretcher, the fire department would send their ambulance to drive me and pick me up and bring me back out again. One day they came to our house, but I didn't think I was going back to the hospital. I was kind of surprised. What's going on here? So they said, "No, we have someone who wants to meet you." So they put me in a stretcher, put me in their ambulance, drove me to a village pool where the Mets all-star second baseman Ron Hunt, who was on the disabled list, was making an appearance. He couldn't play. He was on the DL for about a month and a half. So the ambulance pulls up, they wheel me out, and Ron Hunt walks over to me and starts chatting with me. It was unreal. He asked me about my surgeries, how I felt, said the whole team was looking forward to me recovering really well, and just made me feel like I was floating on air. It was unbelievable. My two favorite Mets, Ron Hunt, number 33, and the original number 31, before Mike Piazza had retired, the original number 31, Larry Benoit. Now, years later, the summer of 1988, my wife and I and our 3 boys, my wife was pregnant with our daughter then, in essence there were 5 of us, went to Montreal on vacation. The Expos, now the Washington Nationals, were playing, and we bought tickets to see them play. Larry Benoit was now their pitching coach. I called their front office, told them who I was and what Larry had done for me 24 years earlier. They were very touched with the story. And I asked if I could possibly meet Larry and thank him. They said, "We'll work something out." We were told to go to a special gate inside the stadium before the game. All of a sudden, this tall man in a now Expos uniform appears, walking down the hallway.